Let's go to the Boardwalk Honda hotline and talk to Coach Jimmy Lynam from NBC Sports Philadelphia, Sixers pre- and post-game analyst all season long and through the playoffs, and was kind enough to join us throughout these. Plus, in fact, we were at lunch today, Pete and I, and someone referenced our conversation from Tuesday's show, Coach, and said how much they enjoyed our conversation. So it's nice to have one final chat on this entertaining season. And you said it on Tuesday that this team brought you back to being a fan every night.
For sure, Mike. I think, everything that you just said kind of would point in that direction, that a lot of people, even those who were hardcore fans over the years and didn't, let's say, leave because of the process, but this certainly, lifted them, like a huge level in terms of being committed emotionally to the fortunes of this team. And I would just echo, understandably so.
So there's a lot to dive into based on all the exit meetings and the pressers that already have occurred. One was the fact that both Brian Colangelo and Brett Brown echoing, Brett obviously wanting to return, Brian saying that they're going to get a deal done. But we did see Dwayne Casey win the Coach of the Year and get let go. So nobody seems to be safe, but it seems that Brett is going to be back next year.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about Brett. And just to take a second on Dwayne Casey, who I consider a friend, I think it kind of points out that there's strange things happen in this world that I think most people would say are a bit inexplicable. I mean, you can certainly on the negative side put some things down. This is 3 straight years Toronto has lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and as a result, unable to advance to a conference final. But the guy was coach at Erie, won 59 games, and if you look at the job he's done over his tenure in Toronto, it would seem like he is a pretty good coach. But there's something, I guess, sometimes to be said that we're not criticizing or challenging one's credentials as a coach, but for us, it's just time for a new voice. We want to just try something different to see if we can't get further. So.
Yeah, it's that fine line, Coach, of saying your regular season accomplishments are outstanding, but we're not sure that we can get any further. And I guess, you can win as many games as you want during the regular season, but if you can't get over that hump, you get judged more on that playoff success and failure, and this is a clear indication. But we've seen that a lot. Teams, Atlanta a couple of years ago, won 60 games, and that team has fallen apart. A regular season success is great in the moment, but a lot of times you're not judged primarily on that.
Well, what's I think ironic about what you just said, that is exactly the conversation that is being held, will be held through the months of the summer regarding one Ben Simmons. And in his case, the conversation is generated by literally 5 games of playoff basketball against the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, and, I guess at some point, starting now for Brett, 52 wins and a playoff series win is nice. That's your starting point. 2 to 3 years down the road, I guess we'll start to see what evolves from this first jumping off point, correct?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, everything prior to the start of this season, you can just kind of put under the vague cloak of preliminary. That was, they were trying to put pieces in place as it turned out to start this season. And you have to say they succeeded admirably this year, the end of the season notwithstanding. And we don't have to go over everything they accomplished. But it was a very, very good year for the 76ers.
Coach Jim Lynam with us. Coach, I saw you say on the Endgame program, I believe, that the biggest question for the Sixers moving forward is Markelle Fultz. So how do you think that gets answered, and how much instruction do you think he needs going into the summer?
I want to be sure I heard that last thing you said, Pete. How much what does he need?
Instruction, because I know that was a caveat in your answer.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and I do think that's the first thing, the first topic that the Sixers must address. They viewed Markelle when they drafted him with the number 1 pick, as a key part of this going forward. And obviously, for whatever reason, it didn't pan out. And David Murphy in the Day's Daily News up in Philadelphia wrote a really insightful article. And I think the first thing that caught my attention was that in his post-season interview, as all the players have with the media, he said that Markelle, in his word, like he vaguely addressed, like what took place over the previous 9 months. And I think the writer's point was like, hey, this was not like, just water flowing over the dam. This was like a really unusual set of circumstances. And to just assume that it has gone away in and of itself would seem like a bit of folly. So I think that's where I would start, where I the Sixers. I think something has to be addressed here in terms of, like, where are we? Where do we want to be? Both in terms of, the person, your mental state, and his physical game. And what's there right now, is not going to get it done. You're not ready to go out like if tomorrow were October 15th and the start of training camp. So like just the passage of 4 months is not going to transform, the guy who's sitting there right now with this particular game to what you need come October 15th.
How hard is it to work with a guy or guys like that are on that level, a guy that was the number 1 pick? Is it hard to tell them that they need to work on things because they think, hey, I went number 1 overall?
I would think what you just said, is it hard to? You could do it from your seat right there, Mike. No, it's real easy to. The point is that it's a two-way street, that the person to whom you're speaking, or with whom would be a better way to say it, with whom you're speaking, has to understand that you're in this together, that the 76ers need for Markelle to be a real good player, and obviously Markelle wants to be a real good player. The issue is, how do we get there? And it starts by the acknowledgement we are nowhere near there yet, period. That's the first sentence. We have a long way to go, period. And both people have to be on the same page at that outset.
Well, and Brian Colangelo kind of said, look, this team had a chance to show that they were good enough. They failed, is essentially what he said. I mean, they played in these playoffs. They won a round, but they weren't good enough, which means they need to add more. And whether more is, if enough is just Markelle Fultz, it doesn't sound, Coach, that that's the way they feel. It sounds like they feel that they need a top-level free agent.
Oh, I don't dispute that. But I think to get a sense, of how you move forward, obviously LeBron would be in the conversation, and it would be fair of you to ask me, well, does Markelle in any way affect that? No, not necessarily. But this is a separate topic. He's one of what you would hope would be your best talents going forward, and you invested a tremendous amount to get him. So I think just in terms of the overall health of the program, the impetus of the program moving forward, I think how you address his situation is every bit as big long-term future of this franchise as anything else you address.
When Brett said today that we'd make it work, do you think he was addressing or saying a guy like LeBron James being ball dominant like Ben Simmons? Can they make that work?
I'm sorry, can they make that work?
Yeah, LeBron James and Ben Simmons, essentially, can they make that work?
Oh, yeah, that's a definitive yes. All you have to do is look at Chris Paul going over to Houston with James Harden. When you have the kind of talents of which you're speaking, and guys who are motivated to want to win, the issue of do they complement one another? They're just so good that it almost transcends the question.
Yeah, I mean, he had mentioned that they were really trying to nudge him to say something. He's smart enough and savvy enough to say, this isn't calculus. We'd make this work. But I guess it is kind of difficult for the coach sometimes. I mean, he had to try to make Nerlens Noel and Okafor and Joel work, and I mean, that was a little clunky at times.
No, you can flat out say that didn't work. I could have told you on the front end it had no chance of working. But please, let's not confuse Nerlens Noel. Let me chuckle at it. And Jahlil Okafor, and don't get me wrong, both NBA players.
Yeah.
But don't confuse those two fellas with LeBron James and Ben Simmons.
I contend that this team was lacking in Nerlens Noel, that he may have been a very nice piece for that second unit as a rim protector and athletic defender.
Well, for me, Mike, and again, I don't mean to be flip, but that you're skirting out on the edge. It doesn't matter. It's immaterial.
Oh,
Whether
sure.
Noel blocked one extra shot or Ilyasova in the minutes made one extra three. Beside the point. Now, you gotta, when you're dealing with stuff like this, you got to deal with the main issues. Get to the essence of the problem. The essence of the problem, you can put it whichever what you want first. Add a free agent, straighten out Markelle Fultz. There are your first two things. And I would add, right after that, get J.J. Redick back on this team.
Okay, so that's number one, because I was just going to ask you. J.J., Marco, Ersan, they all said they want to be back. They all are very similar that we saw. Can you have all three of them? One, none? It sounds like you want J.J. Do you pick between Bellinelli and Ersan, or do you shake both their hands and say, thank you for your service?
Well, I have to have the other things shake out first. I have to see if, in fact, we get a dominant free agent. If we do, who is he? Number one. Number two, do you, in fact, sign J.J.? And number three, do we have, like a process, no pun intended, in place to get Markelle Fultz to who he can be by mid-October this coming fall? And then I can address, do you have whoever you just said? And they did, which I knew they would, T.J. McConnell, they exercised his options. And I assume they will also exercise the option on Rashawn Holmes. They have not yet.
Coach Jim Lynam's with us, and Coach Brett Brown talked about Ben Simmons today, gave priorities on what he thinks Ben Simmons needs to work on. And, of course, the jump shot was in there, but he also added finishing at the rim and getting more comfortable from the foul line and the free throw line. So if you had jump shot, finishing at the rim, and comfortable at the free throw line, which of those areas do you expect to see from Simmons improve the most in his game next year?
Well, it's interesting. I would reverse the order. And this is not in saying that, I don't mean Brett is wrong. But for me, the foul shooting is a big deal because I think that is related to finishing in the rim. So my order would be foul shooting number one, finishing at the rim number two, and then jump shooting number three. And I would say that for me, you could make the case that finishing at the rim in Game 5, that may have been the difference maker in the game. Not only did Ben not do a good job, maybe more than half his shots, but understand my regard for his game is so high that I think he could have had 4 more field goals. And in a game where 3 different people shot 11 foul shots apiece, Tatum being one of those 3 guys, Ben Simmons shot 2. And that speaks volume. That's like a big red light flashing right now. Maybe you can't see it from down in South Jersey up here to the practice facility at Camden. But trust me, if you look hard enough, it's flashing.
It's like a Batman signal.
That's right. Tatum at 11, Saric with 11, and Embiid all with 11. Good point, Coach. So you mentioned Ilyasova, Bellinelli. Mike was asking about them a minute ago. How do you think then the Sixers balance between spending that money on a top-level free agent while trying to bring back some of those guys? I mean, the money has to be distributed, and you got to make that money work.
Yeah, I can't address that. I mean, if you were asking me specific numbers, I'd have to see all those figures in front of me. How much money is going to have to be allotted. Does a LeBron, he gets more than a Kawhi Leonard, let's say, but not much more, I don't believe. Maybe a little more because Kawhi would qualify in terms of an extension. I mean, he's under contract for next year, so he'd be committing for the following year and into the future. But he's going to get a big, big number because of the fact he was third-team All-Pro. He qualifies for what there's a phrase they have, meaning not just a free agent deal, but I think like a super max. I think that's what they refer to it as. So, they're going to have to see who they can get, number one, if in fact they do have a first choice. And, then you go from there. But as I said earlier, those secondary choices, they'll take care of themselves. As you move, further down the pecking order, there are more players available. You're talking about taking care of, the main needs, and there aren't a lot of those guys. I mean, there are 3 premier free agents, and I think they kind of go down. LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. You go down in status. In LeBron's case, you might be talking about the greatest player of all time. Paul George is an all-star player. Again, let's not confuse him with LeBron James.
No, we've seen that show a couple of times, that Paul George was not able to contend with LeBron James. Joel Embiid might be able to somewhere down the line. Some people might say he is the kind of player that can lead a team because he's the best player on the court. He said he wants to drop some weight, but other than his body and his endurance, what would you like to see Embiid work on this offseason?
Well, I think, let me just add a thought. I would say that Joel Embiid was like somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 his normal self during the playoffs from the moment he came back because of that mask. That restricted his peripheral vision to a great extent and really at times hurt him. I don't think there's any question about that. So to address your specific question, I would just like to see him maybe work a little bit on his low post footwork. It's pretty good. It's not far from being Akeem Olajuwon level, which is like dead center perfect. And if he kind of perfected that, and he could do that, I think, quite readily over the summer. He's not far, from being where you'd like it to be, but it would kind of complement the other things he does extremely well.
When the season is over, do you guys as coaches self-evaluate yourself? In other words, does Brett say, man, this is what I need to get better at, and this is what I would have done differently? Because he did reference a couple of things. He said in the playoffs he wished that they defended on the three-point line in this series a little bit better. He referenced that he thought that the second game not calling a timeout is wildly reckless to blame that on why they lost that game. But are there certain moments that he will go back to and say, I need to learn from this moment here and this moment here?
Yeah, I know Brett, so I can answer specifically that you said, are there certain moments? There are, like, incalculable moments. He will go over, like, every single play of the postseason. He'll do it personally. Brett is open enough as a person. He'll have a number of people that he trusts, that he has a confidence and a respect, a confidence in, respect for, critique him, plain and simple. And I think most people or who are in positions where there's a subjective judgment involved as to their performance, they do that. I don't know if you guys ever listen to your own tapes. Like I will tape a post-game show, and, it might be a week later, but I'll watch it just to see, did I like the way I answered that question, on and on.
No doubt.
So I think most people who are successful, they welcome criticism, and it starts with self-critiquing.
Yeah, and then Brett did say he hopes Markelle will play in the Summer League. Now, I know there's a lot of he was the first pick and a lot of status involved with that, but would you like to see, do you think Markelle Fultz would gain from playing Summer League games?
Without question. And a lot of times I vacillate on that with players, or I say, look, it doesn't matter. If you want them to play, let them play. For me, without question. And by way of example, help me, the Laker player, the father of, I'm drawing a blank.
Lonzo Ball and LeVar Ball.
Lonzo, right. Yeah. Lonzo Ball. He played last summer out in Las Vegas, and really Las Vegas is the focal point. I think the whole league is there now. But, yes, without question, with some goals, I think it would do a world of good for him. And really, it would be an intermediate step, like to getting back and playing the way he's capable of playing in real-time NBA games. The Summer NBA League would be a big step up from Pac-12 basketball at Washington State on a team that's going to win 8 games in a building where there's 5,000 people watching, and you're like by far the best player on your team, getting beat every night or every other night, by 15 to 20 points. The NBA Summer League is a big step up from that setting. So for him to establish a base for himself, to go out there and, they can say, all right, we're only going to play him 28 minutes a night or whatever, right? Then you want them to get 15 points. You want them to shoot at least 4 3-pointers a game. You want them to get this many assists, and you set goals for them. And that's the way you start climbing the ladder.
Yeah, one thing is for sure that, and Brian Colangelo mentioned this today, it's not about 1 year, it's about an 8 to 10 year run. They have set themselves up pretty good. But if they do not get that top-level free agent this offseason, what kind of player, as a secondary type of player, do you think that this group needs to add?
Well, I think the type of players that they had on this year's team, I think that would be the formula. Unfortunately, their three-point shooting did not withstand the Boston Celtics defense in the semifinals of the Eastern Conference. So either you have to say we have to get a couple better three-point shooters than what we had, or do you say that the three-point shooting fall off was related to that we didn't quite play the way we were playing through the last 35 games of the season? Parentheses, Ben Simmons wasn't able to do what he was able to do during that period of time. The Celtics shut down some degree of Ben's effectiveness. Now, we could debate, how much, but trust me, it was a lot. And you have to answer. Ben has to answer that. He's got to be able to be as effective. He has to impact the game the way he did during that incredible stretch. He's got to be able to do that against anybody under any circumstances if you're going to aspire to win championships, plural.
It should be a very, very interesting offseason. A lot of young players on this team. And Brian did mention that this is the worst that we will see this group play in the playoffs because they will grow and continue to get better. So that's a good feeling. But as we know, Coach, on the other side, that Boston team, by average age, they are actually younger than the Sixers. So they're going to continue to grow with you. Nothing exists in a vacuum.
Yeah, that Boston team's going nowhere, and whatever you're going to say about the Sixers team, obviously, you can say about the Boston team, and they didn't have Kyrie Irving playing, who's one of the top, certainly one of the top 10 players in the league. And the only thing listening to what you just said, and I did not hear either Brett or Brian yet. Obviously, I'll see that on what I taped later in the day. But I would say that the only thing I would quibble about with Brian's statement is you might not see this team. I mean, there's a kind of a supposition that all these parts will be back here, and I don't know that that's the case. Now, maybe Brian in his mindset, has that as the case. But T.J. McConnell started 2 of these last 5 games. Robert Covington, who was an integral part of this, really didn't give you the playoff performance in this series that you needed from him, to be confident that we can go, further along the line, deeper into the playoffs, to be a legitimate contender for a championship. So I would agree, obviously, in the cases of Ben and Joel, but to say, just broadly team, that's a different story.
All right. Jimmy Lynam has been with us all throughout these playoffs. It's been a lot of fun, very educational.
Great season for the Sixers. A great season, Coach, from you. We appreciate you coming on with us so much and providing your insight. We enjoy the heck out of your time with us. And, hey, we know you'll be heading down here soon to tee it up, right? So come on down. The weather's great.
Sure. I'll be down there this weekend, as a matter of fact. And I'll thank you guys because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking basketball. And you guys, I know, are big fans. You know what you're talking about. And, it's good dialogue.
Well, Coach, as the offseason things happen, and we would love to pick your brain on some of it, we'll have to catch up soon. Draft is right around the corner.
Yeah, sometime around draft time we'll talk again.